New Galaxy Broadcasting proudly presents Integrative Hermetic Health with Hugo Rodier, MD. In this program, we explore a powerful new paradigm for health from the standpoint of integrative medicine. In his practice, Dr. Rodier integrates the ancient Hermetic art and the enduring role of food as medicine with modern nutrition, but also allowing for the wide range of important health practices, including truly valuable medical discoveries, chiropractic, acupuncture, homeopathic, and herbal medicine. In this program, Hugo Rodier, an expert in intestinal health and nutrition, will help the audience discover an approach that focuses on actual cures, not the masking of the elegant simplicity of many health solutions for the sake of profit. Profit too long has been an overriding motive of the pharmaceutical companies, and sometimes, sadly, by many in the medical establishment today. This is Johnny Bluestar. Welcome to another fascinating interview on the Integrative Hermetic Health Show. Generally, I assist the host of the show, Dr. Hugo Rodier, an integrative physician who specializes in nutrition and gastrointestinal conditions. Our show generally reviews the latest research in the world's top medical journals, but we also look for guests who can give our listeners different perspectives on medicine today. Today's guest has indeed a very special perspective. But before we introduce our guest, I would like to relate a few critical facts to you. This one is from an organization called the Sentencing Project. What it says is that the United States is the world's leader in incarceration. There are 2.2 million people in the nation's prisons and jails, a 500% increase over the last 40 years. Changes in law and policy, not changes in crime rates, explain most of this increase. The results are overcrowding in prisons and fiscal burdens on states, despite increasing evidence that large-scale incarceration is not an effective means of achieving public safety. Now, these are a little bit older statistics, but I think they're still maybe even worse, but they're still around the reality of it. In September 2013, the incarceration rate of the United States of America was the highest in the world at 716 per 100,000 of the national population. While the United States represents about 4.4 of the world's population, it houses around 22% of the world's prisoners. Corrections, which includes prisons, jails, probation, and parole, cost around $74 billion in 2007, according to the U.S. Bureau of Justice Statistics. Our guest today is Dr. Karen Gedney, often called Dr. G, during her very interesting career. She is a medical doctor, board-certified in internal medicine, but most important for this interview is her book, 30 Years Behind Bars, which is a portrait of her extensive work as a prison doctor. Now no longer working directly for a prison, Karen crusades for prison reform. This is rather a massive job because, as we described, we are dealing with massive incarceration, a reality that has many sad components. So, Karen, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fine, Johnny.
So the question is, why on earth did you become a prison doctor? How did you end up in that situation?
Well, I can certainly tell your audience that I never dreamed of going to prison and being a doctor when I was in my training, but I am what's known as a National Health Service Corps scholarship winner, which means that if you're sort of poor, you're academically doing well, and you apply for the scholarship, sometimes you can get a free ride to medical school, which happened to me back when I was starting my training. I ended up having to do a 4-year payback, which means the government would say, hey, we're going to support you in medical school, pay for it. And in return, when you're finished with all your training, and that's internal medicine training, we're going to have you put in a place that no other doctor will work. I never, and of course, I must say, when I signed that contract, I don't even think prisons were thought of, but I was right at the time when the Supreme Court, back in 76, did the Estelle versus Gamble case where they said, hey, prisons have to give medical care to inmates if it's a serious medical need, have to have medical access. Many prisons didn't have doctors or didn't care about medical.
Really?
And I'm right in that little avenue where it's really the government and the courts put me in that prison to give medical care. So I entered a world where I was not prepared for. Let me put it that way.
Wow. It is true, though. Do you feel that somehow fate intervened in your life to give you this specific direction? Because obviously, despite the start of it, this became more than simply a job for you. You could say it became a vocation.
It absolutely did, and it was unexpected on my part. Though when I look back, I knew that as a doctor, I always wanted to take care of the, let's say, underserved and make a difference in their lives. And when I was a kid, I read all these great stories about doctors that were all fictional, where they were fighting against abuses of power and they were involved in intrigue and danger and romance. And when I was a little kid, I thought, oh, that's what I want to do. And I lived into it unexpectedly by being tossed into prison.
I did read a little bit about what you thought of being a doctor when you were a kid. And I noticed that in the book that you said that you only thought of working with male patients.
That's the other thing that was very bizarre, because when I was a kid, I was attracted to, movies and TV where you see someone taking care of, and really what they were taking care of were cowboys and Indians. And they were all male. You see what I mean, right?
Yeah, right.
And it was always the female taking care of them because I'm of that generation. And so you didn't really see a female doctor, right?
Yeah.
And in my mind, that was part of, I think I also lived into, and I ended up in a male prison exclusively.
For a long time.
Yeah, 30 years.
Well, of course, one would like to ask, what was it like being a young blonde female doctor taking care of all these male inmates?
It was very different because I didn't realize when you have individuals that have been really incarcerated and put away for a long time, and the prison is not oriented to try to understand people or have empathy or compassion, especially in those days, there was such a hunger for that. And I'm just naive and I just want to help and take care of them. And they, of course, really looked at me as something that...
As a woman.
They became attracted, right? They became attracted to me, or they considered like I was an angel or something. And I remember this is just as an example, I remember one of these older guys in the prison who had been there maybe 40 years or something. And I was just examining him, and he started to tear up and say, I haven't been touched by a female in 40 years. Can I touch you? And then he had this incredible fear on his face because it was just an emotional question. And then he realized, oh no, if she says something to custody, they're going to retaliate. They could take all my property. They could move me to a higher security prison. They could beat me up. I mean, I was not really ready for those sorts of emotions in the men.
Well, you mentioned a word there, which I think maybe you should describe a little bit more, which is custody.
Yeah, custody. In a prison, you have guards, which want to be called custody officers. And it's very much like a military hierarchy where they go from sergeant, lieutenant to captain, and then all the way up to wardens. And when people talk about custody, they're talking about this hierarchy that is in charge of the security of a prison.
Ah, I understand now. Well, another interesting thing is you started in 1987, which was the height of the AIDS scare.
Yes.
How did your prison system deal with that at that time?
Nevada as a state was highly, highly unique in that in 1985, when the first HIV test came out, they tested every single inmate in the state for HIV.
What state were you in?
Nevada.
Ah, okay.
And the reason they were able to do it is because Nevada, even though it's large geographically, it had a very small population back in those days. I mean, we're talking maybe there were only 1.5 million people in the entire state. And my prison population for the state was about 4,400. So that's a doable number if you want to test everyone.
Wow, yeah.
Right, very different than other states. And they tested every inmate, and they found out who had HIV. Then they had no idea what they were going to do with that information from a medical standpoint, because there were no drugs whatsoever available, and these guys were dying. They didn't know what to do in terms of transmission and did they have to protect people. They had no idea about classification. That means, do you put them in cells by themselves? Do you not care? Do you let them work here? Do you let them work there? And people who were around in 1985 and were aware of the epidemic realized there was a lot of disinformation and fear, like, oh no, the guy will spit into my food and then I'll die.
Yes, I remember that.
Right. You can imagine in a prison, there's the issue of, do they work in a culinary? Now, from a medical standpoint, there's no reason they can't work in a culinary, but the warden made political decisions like, I'm not going to allow guys who are positive to work in the culinary because then I open myself to potentially a riot, things like that.
Yeah. Well, I imagine from reading your book particularly that there were a lot of decisions that were made by wardens that were political.
Absolutely.
As a matter of fact, it's really interesting. One of the things that I found that amazing kind of was you were very, and we'll go into this more, but you were very active in developing programs at one point, and they were very successful. And then you get a new warden, and boom, they disappear. And people couldn't even go out in the yard and have the kind of recreational freedom they had before, right? I mean, so the extreme. There were extraordinarily extremes depending on the sort of temperament of the wardens, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. When you look at my career, which is 30 years, I lived through about 9 or 10 wardens. And they, let's just say, mindset-wise and politically, they swung from the light to the dark and then back and forth again. And when you had a warden who had what I will call a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset, in the growth mindset, they had the belief system that, well, can we change things to improve? And we are willing to take risks. And we believe that people can change with exposure to education and vocation and work. I enjoyed working under their leadership. When I had a warden who had a fixed mindset, who felt we've always done it that way, don't tell me we can do anything better, and no one ever changes, and if their mouth is moving, they're lying, and they've got nothing coming. That was miserable to work under when you're a doctor.
Well, listen, we have to take a break now. But when we come back, I want to get a little bit more into the AIDS situation, and also of course, a continual theme in this is the different ways of handling the correctional system, the very hard and the softer approach. And I think it's important to analyze that not only for the prison system, but for the whole state of mind of our country right now. We'll be right back. This is Johnny Bluestar, CEO of New Galaxy Enterprises, a media content development company. The original productions by Amazon, Hulu, and Netflix in particular has opened up a new and powerful form of television that has both global income and still unexplored profit potential as convergence between offline and online media continues to blossom. We can help persons needing creative help to turn their ideas for television pilots into actionable, marketable scripts. There's probably nothing more exciting in the field of entertainment than these new vistas online, as that capacity crosses more and more to the big screen, and the opportunities for instantaneous online projections of any type of media in that perennially popular venue. To learn more about New Galaxy, see samples of our work, or talk to us about your project, please go to www.newgalaxyenterprises.com and fill out the contact form.
Boots in Manhattan is a coming-of-age novel by Ray Boylan and Johnny Bluestar. It is about a young Tom Boots Raymond who grows up in New York in the 1940s who was a member of a street gang.
My friends and I were about to start our own game of stickball when Rabbit Lacey, the head of the Rattlers, came up to us and tried to move in on our game. We were called dwarves, the youngest members of this stupid gang.
Hey, Kevin, I need you to get some gloves and some stuff I left at my place.
No, this is our game.
Hey, are you my good little dwarf or what?
You've been calling me a dwarf since I was 6. We're not your personal slaves, pal.
Hey, what is this? A dwarf rebellion? All right, big guy, we ditched the dwarf thing. We make you guys regular rattlers.
No, it's too late.
He looked at Jay and me. We looked away. Rabbit was now angry, and he pushed Kevin hard with the palms of his hand. Kevin tried to ram him in the stomach, but he stepped aside, throwing Kevin into the curb where he fell to the ground, bleeding profusely at the knee. Still, he managed to get up.
My street.
Kevin shouted at Rabbit, pointing at him with an angry index finger.
Find out more by Googling Boots in Manhattan, a 1940s coming-of-age novel, part 1 of the novel series The Foot Soldier by Ray Boylan and Johnny Bluestar. Google with the words Boots in Manhattan, Ray Johnny Kindle. That's Boots in Manhattan, Ray Johnny Kindle.
The following song, Early in the Morning, was recorded over 60 years ago in Parchment Farm, which is what the Mississippi State Penitentiary is called. It's the only maximum security prison for men in Mississippi. The rhythm of this song and its melody were probably from the African continent and brought over on slave ships. But now its music is cemented into the tradition and history of the Deep South.
Well, it's early morning, baby, when I ride, Lordy Mama. Well, it's early morning, baby, when I ride. Well, when it's early in the morning, baby, when I ride, baby, you have around my right side. Well, around my right side, baby, around my right side, sugar. Well, I have a mirror around my right side. Well, Lord, mother, Lord, sugar. Lord, Rosa, Lord, yeah. Well, I heard you never told her, he told her dirty lie, baby. Well, I heard you never told her, he told her dirty lie. Well, I heard you never told her, he told her dirty lie, baby. And when he want $1, he gonna rise and fly. Well, he gonna rise and fly, sugar. He gonna rise and fly, baby. When he hanging on $1, he gonna rise and fly. Well, Lord, rolling. Well, Lord, yeah, Lord, baby. Well, Lord, sugar. Well, Lord, yeah. Well, rocks and ground for the maker. Make a solid roll of sugar. And take a rock and ground for the maker. Make a solid roll. Well, it takes a rock and grab to make a solid roll of sugar. It takes a good-looking wife for me to make a good-looking hoe. Well, it make a good-looking hoe, baby. It make a good-looking Lord of sugar. It takes a good-looking mama to make a good-looking hoe. Well, Lord, rolling. Well, Lord, sugar. Well, Lord, rolling. Well, Lord, yeah. Well, bought a pack of wood packet on the schoolhouse door. Sugar. Well, a pack of wood packet on.
We're back on the Integrative Hermetic Health Show with Dr. Karen Gedney, and we have been discussing a bit about time when she began to work in the 1980s, and there was an AIDS scare. But I want to go into what's happening now in the AIDS scene, and I'd like your opinion about that, Karen. Is that okay?
Fine with me.
In 2010, I'm quoting from the Center for HIV Law and Policy. In 2010, black men had an imprisonment rate that was nearly 7 times that of white men and almost 2.5 times that of Latino men. Each year, an estimated 1 in 7 persons living with HIV passed through a correctional or detention facility. At the end of 2010, state and federal prisoners held over 20,000 people living with HIV. The rate of HIV among prisoners is 5 to 7 times of the general population. HIV rates are the highest among black prisoners. The correctional setting is often the first place incarcerated men and women are diagnosed with HIV and provided treatment. Inmates in jails and prisons across the United States generally do not receive health care that meets public health standards. In some facilities, prisoners with HIV have no confidentiality or privacy regarding their HIV status. They may be segregated and housed separately from other inmates, or may be blocked from some recreational activities and work assignments. For many inmates, the behaviors and circumstances that contributed to their HIV infection are those that led to their incarceration, like drug use, sex work, domestic abuse, mental illness, poverty. For others, infection with HIV occurred during incarceration via sex or sharing needles. Response to the critical need for healthcare interventions and prevention efforts in correctional facilities have a direct impact on the health of the communities in which prisoners return. Karen, how do you think that the HIV situation should be addressed now?
Well, as a physician who looks at the way disease is transmitted and also having my experience of dealing with HIV in the prison, any infectious disease, you would first want to absolutely figure out how to prevent it. So the big piece, of course, is to have individuals who are sexually active take precautions for preventing exposure. The other thing is, in terms of who you really look at, you want to find out who is at the highest risk. And as you pointed out very well, that if we want to find these people, I really feel that because there is such a high rate in incarcerated people, that Nevada did the policy where everyone who came into the prison, so I told you in 1985 they tested everyone. Then Nevada had the policy, everyone entering, it was an automatic blood test, and they looked for syphilis and HIV.
Right.
Nevada was also highly unique that everybody who left the prison was retested. So we actually knew who converted in the prison. And other states do not do that. I mean, that's very, very rare. And
that's a good thing, right?
Well, I think it's a good thing because initially we thought, and this is, an assumption, oh no, here they are in the prison, they'll be shooting up and having sex and doing this and that. We're just going to have an unbelievable exposure rate. Well, what happened was that HIV, yes, is transmissible, but is not as transmissible as some people thought in the early days. For example, some people thought, oh, the person's bleeding. If his speck of blood will get on me, I'm all done for. And that's not true. In terms of needle exposures, where nurses or docs like me get stuck with needles, which did happen to me, with men who were positive for it, the risk rate was basically about 1 in 300 for a one-time stick.
Oh,
and that
okay.
depends on, the amount, but let's say 1 in 300. But in comparison, someone who has active hepatitis B, it's 1 in 3. Just to show you, there's 100-fold difference in the potency of transmission. Now, in terms of conversion rates in the prison, our rates were incredibly low. Now, part of that is guys would be bleaching or like trying to, clean up their rigs a bit because they were worried, or if they knew someone was positive, they didn't shoot up with them.
Oh, could you define rigs, please?
Oh, yes. Excuse me.
I read it in your book and I wasn't positive. I mean, I think I know what it is, but I'd just like to know.
Yeah. Rigs are homemade contraptions to shoot up a drug. And sometimes they'll steal a syringe, or sometimes they'll get a needle and they'll build something else. They're make-believe syringes. And unfortunately, the inmates will share them. You might have one make-believe contraption, a rig, which is shared by a dozen guys. Oh. And that you can imagine. And there you see hepatitis C transmission, less HIV because it is not a tough virus.
Mm-hmm. What do you mean by that?
When I say a tough virus, it is, like I said, one stick for an active Hep B patient, you have a 1 in 3 chance. Maybe for HIV, 1 in 300. So if I had to be stuck with something, you see what I mean? I'm going for the one who's less potent to get me infected.
Well, how did you, when you had these accidents, how did you feel?
Well, I'll tell you, my first exposure was before prison. I was in Cincinnati as a medical student, 1981, when they were just talking about AIDS. And they didn't even have a test, not even a test. Remember, the test came out in 85. And this guy in Cincinnati, he was visiting from San Francisco, and he was dying of everything known to mankind that was related to this horrible new disease they were talking about.
Right.
So everybody knew he was just dying of full-blown, AIDS. In fact, they used to call it GRID. And I was a medical student, and they put us sort of on the front line like guinea pigs, I think. And I had to go in and get blood out of him and put it into a special syringe. And I was so nervous that when I was trying to get his blood into the topper of this tube, it missed, and it injected it into my finger. Now, he was riddled with, he was riddled with virus. You see what I mean? He would have had a huge count. And here I stuck myself. And my first thought was not like, I'm going to die. My first thought was like, oh, I hope no one saw. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
See, that was my first thought as a student. And I never told anybody. There was no ability to test whether I had it or not. And of course, in medical school, you're taught that everything you're exposed to, you start worrying you have. You get taught one
Yes.
thing, you think you've got it. And my brain went the complete opposite, where I was like, I'm not going to think about it, and just put it out of my brain. But when the tests came out in 85, I got tested later, and I did not have it.
Well, that's good. But by that time, you would have known, wouldn't you?
Not necessarily, because once you are exposed to the virus, depending on your immune system, in those days it may have taken 5 or 10 years before you would have actually shown any symptoms.
Wow.
See?
Yeah.
Right. So you wouldn't know. And part of me later realized, wow, there are some people who have a genetic mutation called CCR5', which are Northern Europeans who have a receptor on a cell where the HIV just doesn't hook right, and they seem to be a bit immune to HIV.
Oh, really?
And then my brain thought, well, wait a second. Maybe I was really lucky because I'm about as Northern European as you can get.
Okay.
Right, genetically. And I've never been tested genetically to see if I have that mutation. But part of me wondered, maybe I was lucky, or maybe I have that mutation that makes it harder for an HIV to stick.
Well, you say Northern European. Where from? Scandinavia, or? Well,
yeah. Northern European is definitely Scandinavia, Sweden, Northern Germany, and on both sides, my mother and my father are Northern Germans.
Oh, okay.
So
what would you say should be done now? I mean, this is still an amazing problem. Is there anything different that we should be doing?
Well, I definitely think that you want to keep people aware that it is a problem, because they have like one pill that has 3 different drugs in it, people are not scared anymore. So now they're becoming more cavalier about their sexual practices, and syphilis rates are going up, and that means they're not protecting themselves, and that means HIV will start going back up again.
Oh, well.
Right. So one piece is you want to still keep it in the minds of the outside world that, yes, this is still a problem. 2, we know that Black men are especially at risk, and sex workers especially at risk. In fact, in the prison, we had a small female population, but we used to keep statistics, right? And the male population in my prison was about 1.5 to 2% of the people in the male prison were positive for HIV back in those days. Women, 5%. That meant 1 out of 20 of the women were positive.
Wow.
And people didn't realize, well, how could that be? They're not having da-da-da-da. And it was because they were sex workers predominantly who ended up in prison. That's why.
Oh, that's interesting.
That was a shock to people in the outside world, where we had the female inmates had twice as much HIV. because all the press was going to the gay white homosexuals in San Francisco, right?
Right, and they were being blamed for everything.
Right, yes. But when you looked at the prison, you see different. And of course, the black men in the prison also had probably 4 to 5 times the rate of HIV as the white men.
Wow.
And, and part of that is related to not practicing safe sex, being more sexually active, more risky behavior, things like that.
Well, look, we're going to take a break now, but when we get back, I want to go a little bit more into the genesis of this massive incarceration, what happened and why it happened, and what you think about it. And we'll be right back, okay?
Okay.
See ya. My company, New Galaxy Enterprises, is a California corporation specializing in the creation of media and promotional content. We are focused on original, innovative projects that are good for humanity. These projects could be nonfiction books or novels, fictional screenplays or documentary content, websites and website content, commercial advertising content for print, audio, or video products on the internet, television, or radio, musical scores for advertising, television, or film, video, audio editing, etc. We want to promote products and projects that support the environment, encourage a healthy experience in living, developing, nurturing, and useful technology, and offering platforms for positive, socially constructive entertainment or informative, transformative media. Our experience in creating a variety of products like this is rather vast, and we offer client-based and collaborative products, as well as the opportunity of active investors to join us in the creation and promotion of proprietary products, some of which are in latter stages of development. For more information, go to www.newgalaxyenterprises.com. That's www.newgalaxyenterprises.com. If you're interested in talking to us, just fill out the contact sheet and we will get back with you. If you're not fond of books, you may be interested in watching Dr. Rodier's slide presentation on his website, hugorodier.com. That's HUGORODIER.com. It lasts 48 minutes and explains the simple roots of all diseases with pictures and graphs that are easy to understand. The presentation includes basic principles of physics, philosophy, anthropology, and history to truly integrate the most vital pillars of human health. The name of this song is called Prison Song and is a song written by the English singer Graham Nash. It has a sad backdrop because it was about his father who served time in Strange Ways prison for a crime he said he never committed. Here's a quote from Graham Nash in 2016. He says, "There's something ironic. I'm in Manchester singing Prison Song and the show was taped. I look at the film and who do I see but the judge who sent my father to jail? I really wanted to talk to him."
I have to leave ya for buying something from a friend. They say I've done wrong for protecting the name of a man. They say you'll have to leave ya, so now I'm bidding you farewell for much too long. And here's a song to sing for every man inside. If he can hear you sing, it's an open door. There's not a rich man there who couldn't pay his way and buy the freedom that's a high price for the poor. Kids in Texas smoking grass, 10 years sentence comes to pass. Misdemeanor in Ann Arbor. Ask the judges why. Another friend said to her kids, I'm gonna have to leave ya for selling something to the man. I guess I did wrong, and although I did the best I could, I'm gonna have to leave ya. So now I'm kissing you farewell for much too long. And here's a song to sing for every man inside. If we can hear you sing, it's an open door. There's not a rich man there who couldn't pay his way and buy the freedom that's a high price for the poor.
We're back on the Integrative Hermetic Health Show with Dr. Karen Gedney, and we're discussing basically her work as a prison doctor and her perspective as a speaker and crusader for prison reform. Karen, I'm going to read you something. This is from the Sentencing Project. This is an organization that is involved in prison reform. And this is one thing they say about what's happened here. Okay, in other words, why did all this happen with this massive incarceration? It's because, they say, we started sending more people to prison. A series of law enforcement and sentencing policies of the tough-on-crime era resulted in dramatic growth in incarceration. Since the official beginning of the war on drugs in the 1980s, the number of people incarcerated for drug offenses in the U.S. skyrocketed over 40,900 in 1980 to 452,964 in 2017. Today, there are more people behind bars for a drug offense than the number of people who were in prison or jail for any crime in 1980, for any crime. The number of people sentenced to prison for property and violent crimes has also increased, even during periods when crime rates have declined. So we've also, and we'll get into this a little more, we're also sending people to prison for much longer terms. So I believe under the Clinton administration, there were, these 3-time offender rules, and a lot of people were put in prison and stayed there for a long period of time. And that's another part of it. Is that correct?
Yes. Unfortunately, the 3 strikes and you're out laws were based on emotion, not pragmatic, let's say, investigation of, is this really what's effective and truly reducing violent crimes?
So how would you describe what happened here in terms of these tough on crime things? How would you add to what we've discussed?
Well, I think that you are summarizing what I have found regarding mass incarceration, because I've looked at this myself and when I give talks. And if you compare the United States, we had a sort of similar incarceration rate to other countries. And it was really the late 70s where you see this uptick. And it basically then became a good 5 times more than other industrialized countries. And if you look at a country like Germany, which I'm very familiar with because all my relatives live there, they have 1/10 of the prison population per capita and 50% less violent crimes.
Wow.
And when you look at statistics like that, you think, okay, now what are we doing? And that makes no sense if we think incarceration actually keeps us safer.
And a lot of these people, they're really involved in very nonviolent crimes, correct?
Well, many are. Many ended up spinning into the prison system because of possession. And it was really under Nixon that, for example, possession of cocaine was highly different, whether it was powder or crack cocaine. There are some people that felt that the stomp on crack cocaine was because of they were being used by the lower class and by the black population in the inner city, where the powder cocaine was used by sort of the higher ups and elites and celebrities. And notice that both of these drugs are really the same drug. They have a different way of hitting the system. And you had a tremendous difference in what one could be sentenced for, depending on which way it was synthesized, let me put it that way. And these sentences were incredibly long for these people. Plus, what you didn't talk about, which is what I see, is that people end up in prison usually when they're younger and they do something stupid. And then they have an ex-felon stuck on their butt, and you toss them out in the outside world. And as a society, we are not like other we're not like other industrialized countries where we want those people to reintegrate and not come back. We have a tremendous amount of hurdles and problems with these individuals getting jobs or housing or food stamps because they have that ex-felon stuck on their butt, and they bounce back into prison. And the recidivism nationally, people throw around, half of them go back to prison. And when you look at a state like Nevada on their statistics will say, well, 26% come back. But that's disingenuous because it depends how they look at recidivism. Nevada looks at it as if a person within 3 years bounces back into a Nevada prison, that's recidivism. Yes, but what about all the people who bounce to California and then bounce into their prison? See, that numbers aren't captured. You see what I mean?
Yeah, I do.
So these numbers are very disingenuous. And when the Bureau of Justice tries to collect numbers, it's not as clear as you would like to think, because every state's doing their own thing. Every state has different definitions on what's what. Nobody knows, well, he didn't come back. Well, yeah, he died homeless on the street. I don't know if that's, like a success story. See what I mean?
Well, this reminds me of our employment statistics, where people are considered to be unemployed if they are still in the system of getting some kind of employment benefits. But when they leave, they're no longer counted on some of the statistics that are put out by the government popularly, so that it looks like there's a lot less unemployment than there really is.
Right. And I think once you're in like a little niche and you become a little bit more aware of the depth of everything, you realize when people start throwing around statistics, it's not as clear as you would think. But I know, for example, in Nevada, and this is just recent, that many individuals who ended up back in prison were not because they did a new crime. They had a technical violation. In fact, I was in a prison board meeting, about 8 months ago, and our new Attorney General, Aaron Ford, was telling the governor, hey, Governor, do you know that 58% of all the individuals going back into our prisons did not do another crime? They had a technical violation of a parole. Now,
that's really interesting.
That's very, very, and let me tell you, the new governor, who is Governor Sisolak, his little eyes really opened up. He goes, are you telling me that more than half of the people that went back to prison actually didn't do another crime? That's right, Governor. It was a technical violation. And when people say, well, what does that mean, Karen, a technical violation? Let's say you're a drug addict, you did a burglary or something. Part of your parole is that you cannot use drugs. Okay. So let's say you go out into the outside world and you're picked up for something and they do a P test on you and you come up positive for whatever, a narcotic. Well, maybe you were at a doctor's office and you got narcotics, or maybe you took your friend's pills because your back was hurting, or maybe you're using, but that's a technical violation and they bounce you back into prison. When, of course, if you had a pragmatic mindset, you would think, let's deal with that problem because it's far too costly to toss them back into prison.
Yeah, right. I understand. Well, let's go into one other factor. We're pretty much approaching the end of this. I'm afraid that we're going to have to go for another whole show. Is that okay?
That's fine with me.
But before we do, let's get into this one, which we kind of mentioned before, but this is again from the sentencing organization. sentencing project. Harsh sentencing laws like mandatory minimums combined with cutbacks in parole release keep people in prison for longer periods of time. The National Research Council reported that half of the 222% growth in the state prison population between 1980 and 2010 was due to an increase of time served in prison for all offenses. There's also been an historic rise in the use of life sentences. 1 in 9 people in prison is now serving a life sentence, nearly a third of whom are sentenced to life without parole. That's an amazing statistic there.
Yeah, and extremely different than other industrialized countries. Other countries like Germany realize there can be a violent crime, like a murder, and they're sentencing maybe 5 or 6 years and getting the person help. And then when that person leaves, their chance of committing another violent crime is very, very small, because a lot of violent crime is related to an emotional glitch. And if people are honest, almost anyone has the potential of doing something violent in the right moment, the right time, right circumstances, whatever. In fact, I tell people, when I was in 4th grade and a bully was messing with me, and I was tall as a kid, and he had been instrumental in having my uncle's dog killed. And you can imagine I'm an emotional 4th grader. Oh. And when he bullied me, I basically slammed his head into a concrete wall. And I realized, and I must say, in that instant, I was capable of actual significant violence to hurt someone. And his little eyes rolled up into his head, and he slumped down on the floor. And I'm sure I gave that kid a concussion, but he never bullied me again. But imagine if he had died. Would I have gone to prison for a lifetime as a 4th grader? They do this in our country.
I didn't know they do it for 4th graders.
Well, but 10, 12 years old. I mean,
yes, I've heard that.
One kid was given the death sentence at 12, right?
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that Brian Stevenson was the one who, that lawyer guy who that book is all about, really got that kid off a death sentence. But I'm just saying that I realized at that point in time that I was capable of violence. And that was at 4th grade. I had that realization, which is why I've always kept about as emotionally even keel as a human being can be.
Yes, well, I understand. It's funny because I had a problem in 3rd grade. I used to be chased by this gang of kids during the playground. And as we went to another school, and the kid who was the ringleader was still there. And he used to try to beat me up every single day. Then one day, my teacher knew about it, but, nothing was done about it. So one day I was fighting with him. I accidentally punched him in the nose and his nose started to bleed, and his mother came in to protest against me. And the teacher laughed, but he never, I went through all these grades till 12th grade with this kid, and he never went near me again. So, right. But yeah, it's violence. I look at things like this, that on a kind of a spiritual level, we have a right to defend ourselves. We have a right to use physical force to defend ourselves, even possibly lethal force. But it has to come from a place that's not of hate and destructiveness, And so I think that when you have that type of perspective, you're more balanced in how you use that kind of capacity.
Yeah, the interesting thing about defending yourself, the honor cultures, look at defending themselves in a very different way. Or men who have their wives cheating on them, they look at defending themselves in a different way, where they lash out violently.
Yeah.
Right? So it all depends on, and I mean, to me, what would make sense if people are more confident to begin with, so they don't take every slight and problem as a threat.
Well, listen, Karen, we are at the end of our show, and we're going to have another one quite soon. And I appreciate you being with us. Can you tell us a little bit how to contact you if people want to hear what you're doing, and how to get your book?
Yeah, my book is 30 Years Behind Bars, Trials of a Prison Doctor. It's available on Amazon and Audible. My website is discoverdrg.com. And I do have a Facebook where I just deal with prison things, and that's Karen Gedney, Dr. G. There are 3 different avenues to find me.
And I have to say, having read your entire book, that it is a very fascinating book, and we'll discuss more of it in our next show. And thank you very much for being with us today, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Johnny.
The Coalition is a unique project designed to empower its members both individually and collectively. Besides individual empowerment, its broader focus is on the restoration, protection, and enhancement of citizen and human rights throughout the world through the aid of its members. As this project is centered in the United States, our first task is to create a website and social network infrastructure to promote collective efforts to take back our rightful control as citizens over our government as designed by our founding fathers. Although we must begin with the social network restricted to United States citizens, the organization will also host a global dialogue for the discussion of human rights by citizens of democratic nations throughout the world. If you're interested, please check us out in the GoFundMe.com website, entering in the search field the Coalition for Planetary Empowerment. That is, go to GoFundMe.com and enter in the search field the Coalition for Planetary Empowerment. For more information about Dr. Rodier's practice, books, blogs, and newsletters, contact Hugo Rodier, MD, at www.hugorodier.com. That's HUGORODIER.com. We will go out with a song called How I Got in the Penitentiary. It was part of a compilation of songs recorded live at the Mississippi and Louisiana state penitentiaries.
Well, boss, the way I got in trouble, the first time the folks was barring me, and I just got in the penitentiary and just wake so much. I had to wake and cut up the fella and shoot him up, and then when I got out of the penitentiary, I thought I had waked enough, and I decided I could make my living without waking, and I come at putting pistols on folks, and that wouldn't do it, and I just come at stealing everything, wasn't hard to nail down, and the police just come at running me every which way, every way I turned. So after I got them started to run me, I just kept on doing wrong. Fighting, stealing, and robbing, and sometime I wouldn't be done nothing, but I'd been doing so much there when they'd get me where I'd you'd have been got in there. And 1 or 2 times they arrested me, and I had told them I hadn't done nothing. They said, well, I arrest you in advance, you're going to do something. So I just, that's the way I stayed the penitentiary all the time. In and out for the last 18 years.